and welcome to another video. Today I will be doing a book review on this book right here, the Knitting Pattern Writing Handbook, How to Write Great Patterns That Knitters Will Love to Make, by Christina McGrath and Sarah Walworth. Did I get that right? Yes. So before I get into this review, I would like to give a disclaimer. In the larger scheme of things, this is a best practices book. And what I mean by that is, I think the best way to explain this is that, colloquially, there are two meanings when we talk about writing knitting patterns, right? You have the designing part, so writing the construction of the garment, armhole shaping, just construction of the piece, the instructions. But then you also have the way in which patterns are written, and the latter meaning is what this book covers. So for instance, there is no in-depth information about garment construction or how to grade pieces. So this book, for the most part, just gives a general overview of the process of writing the pattern all the way to publishing it. So yeah, that was the disclaimer. I would also just quickly want to give my general opinion on this book. I think this is an excellent book. I think it really sets the standard for what should be considered a great pattern in this day and age of knitting. That being said, in terms of audience, I would say that this book is more essential for beginners, and that if you have some experience in pattern writing, that there is definitely a thing or two, probably even more things, to be honest, that you can learn from this book. So let's have a look at the content. This book consists of 7 chapters, and each chapter starts with a drawing and an introduction to what is going to be discussed in the chapter. Then you have the main content, and at the end of each chapter, there is a checklist that covers the content of the chapter, and then a Q&A section as well that answers some common questions concerning the content of the chapter. So starting off with chapter 1, Foundations of a Good Knitting Pattern. As the title states, you'll learn about what exactly makes a good knitting pattern. And they introduce this concept called the 4 C's: clear, correct, consistent, and concise. Concise for me was the most interesting section. I have experience knitting very old vintage patterns as well as very modern ones. And if you have a similar experience to me, you'll know that there has been, over the years, a huge progression from bare bones knitting patterns that kind of expect you to not be a beginner and figure things out on your own, to very elaborate patterns that will explain every single technique and what type of cast on, for instance, that you should use at specific times. And it's gotten to the point where now a pattern being really extensive is used as a promotional feature for said pattern. And what I really like in this book is that it gives a healthy medium for that. So not too bare bones that it gets really hard to understand a pattern, and also not so elaborate that a knitter might feel completely overwhelmed having to go through 30 pages to knit a sweater. The section on consistency was also very interesting. This one mainly focused on style guides. So what is a style guide? Why is it important? How do you make one? And this is one of the reasons why I think that this book is absolutely essential for beginner pattern writers, because establishing a style guide at the start of your pattern writing journey can significantly increase the quality of your patterns and also establish trust from knitters who knit your patterns very early on. And that's really important if you want to start designing knitwear. The checklist in this chapter covers the 4 C's, which is really nice because then you can always come back after every time you write a new pattern and check if you've hit those basic requirements. Moving on to chapter 2, components of a pattern. Now, in chapter 1, it was all about the proper and stylistic ways in which you can write a knitting pattern. Chapter 2 is all about the basic things in terms of information that needs to be in a knitting pattern. And this chapter not only covers what should be in a knitting pattern, but also it covers what should be on the purchasing page. And this is so, so important because there have been many knitting patterns that I was interested in but ended up not buying because there was no information on sizing, on gauge, on yarn amount. And so that just goes to show how important not only having a good knitting pattern is, but also the way in which you market your knitting patterns. Yeah, so this chapter just goes through the entire list, materials that you need, gauge, other types of information, pictures, what type of pictures you should take. It also covers the importance of accessibility, not only in terms of, for instance, vision, but also in the way people process things. We all pass information differently, and so offering knitters different options, such as not only having written instructions but also charted instructions, makes the pattern more accessible to more people. Then chapter 3 is all about gauge, the importance of it, how to measure it, how to write it down, conversion from centimeters to inches and the other way around. And there's not that much information that was new to me, and I wouldn't really consider myself a gauge connoisseur or very knowledgeable about gauge, but I think that the basics are in there. And so I do think it's a solid explanation when you're starting out writing patterns. Similarly to chapter 3, chapter 4, which is all about charts, also covers the essentials of charts, how to read them, how to make them clear and concise. Yeah, nothing too groundbreaking, but essential again if you are planning to use charts in your patterns. Moving on to chapter 5, sizing, which for me was one of the more interesting chapters of the book. In my opinion, this was a great introduction to sizing of a pattern, the importance of being size inclusive. It also covers how to be size inclusive, so size inclusive practices, and also writing your pattern in a way that makes it easy to adjust. There's also a section about ease, and actually in the back there are a number of sizing charts which include a large number of sizing points. So for instance, I'm here at a standard sizing chart for adult women, and this also goes from, okay, I'm gonna have to give this in inches and centimeters, chest measurement of 28 inches all the way up to 66 inches, and in centimeters that is 70 centimeters up until 165. But yeah, talking about the measurement points, you have neck base, upper chest, chest, under bust, waist, high hip, hip, arm, sky. I don't know what that actually means, or if I even pronounced that correctly.
Arm sigh.
Yes, upper arm, elbow, forearm, wrist, shoulder drop. You get the point. There are tons of measurement points. There are sizing charts for women, for men, and also for children. I will say though, there are no standard sizing for adult heads, but if you do have the Vogue Ultimate Guide knitting for knitting book, the one that a lot of knitters have, that one does have measurements for heads. The baby chart does have measurements for heads. Chapter 6, Common Sweater Pitfalls, is all about the most common sizing mistakes, and this was another chapter that I thought to be very insightful. It goes over fit issues with regards to the shoulders, the neck, the chest, even the cuffs, which I thought to be very interesting. I wasn't aware that that was a common problem area, but apparently it is. And I just thought that it was very interesting to learn about that. However, the book doesn't really cover in depth how one should fix those issues. However, it does provide you some resources that you can acquire yourself and look into and get a better understanding of how to get a better fit when you're trying to grade your knitting pattern. Moving on to the last chapter, chapter 7, working with a tech editor. Excellent information, excellent advice. This chapter is all about what exactly tech editing is, why it's important, and when in the process of writing your knitting pattern, you should hire a tech editor. I personally think that if you are a beginner knitwear designer and you buy this book, you will save more money in the tech editing process than you would have spent on this book. So what I'm trying to say is that it's cost efficient to get this book if you're planning to write a pattern. So yes. One last thing that I would like to note is that at the back of the book, there is a list of resources that contains titles of books and also a couple of lines covering what those books are good for. Really, really handy. Again, if you are looking to improve or learn more about a specific thing within knitting, writing knitting patterns. Yes. So in a nutshell, this book is great. I would highly recommend you getting this if you want to start writing patterns. Also, if you're not interested in that, it's just very handy information. If you do read it, because it's not that long, you will also get better at spotting good patterns, which can also improve your knitting experiences. So that's everything I had to say on this book. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you soon in another video. Bye bye!